what are the conditions or the common conditions that could cause toxic stress?
Well, how early do you want to start?
Like the most basic.
The Soapbox PH.
The most basic, oh my gosh. Okay, here we go. Of course, I don't guarantee that people won't turn off this recording as they start listening. So where it starts, if you really think about it, if the mother, while pregnant, is living in a stressful environment, if it's chaotic, here's what we're looking for. If it's chaotic, punitive, aggressive, if it's unpredictable, in other words, it's not really stable, and if the structure of it is constantly in a state of change, those things are global kind of concerns that create toxic stress. You add to that a lot of dynamics. When toxic stress is going on, some people adapt to that by moving into over-controlling behavior. And now what you get is also a layer of shame and contempt. So when you take those issues that are biologically going on and you add shame and contempt to them, you have a recipe to destroy the nervous system of the child. This begins, I can explain this pretty simply. Around the middle of the second trimester, the stress hormones that are going on in the mother, though that fiery cocktail, makes its way across the placenta. And as it enters that child, that fetus's system, it triggers responses that should not be triggered for a few years. This activation of their system while their body is developing can actually compromise the body. So you have an increased risk of ADHD, you have an increased risk of autism, you have an increased risk of all sorts of health-related issues, particularly asthma and allergies, eczema. All of these things are going to have an increased risk factor because of what the mother's experiencing in the second trimester. There's a biological reason for this. Geneticists and, people that do that kind of research have repeatedly pointed out what the reason that stuff is being translated through the placenta to the child is to help the child be prepared to live in the environment of the mother once the child is born. Well, so if we have a very stressed mother and she's pregnant, and then that child is born into that stressed environment, they're already wired to respond. They're already much more sensitive to the environment, and they're going to be more reactive. And you're going to see with children, particularly young children, see a lot of anger and aggression and rage. They don't learn very well from normal empathy-related kinds of things because we built them that way in utero. So that's where your toxic stress journey can begin. Then if your home is one of those homes where people love each other, but there's this unrelenting, for example, one of the things that I think is really interesting in a number of different cultures, not just the Philippine culture, is that the family wants to dictate what the children do, how they do it, and the parameters of everything. And yet the same parents that are doing that grew up hating that. But because they're not regulated well enough to choose differently, they end up doing the same thing. And what it does is puts a demand load, which we call an unrelenting demand of constant stress on the child. And, quite often family members, particularly when you're dealing with intergenerational family structures, you have layers of family stress being put on a person. And so it becomes, if you think about how people react to that, what we see quite often intergenerationally over time is the emergence of a honor culture or machismo culture where the way people deal with it is by moving into over control. And so they get assaultive, they get aggressive, they get punitive, they get really sensitive about slights, and they get angry if their ways aren't, being followed, that they just really are in an over control mode. And when that becomes the norm in any culture, what it does is ramps up the amount of toxic stress in those home environments.